I just pulled up my way too early top 25, but I want to make a condition on this for people to understand. I am not predicting this to be the final top 10 or the final top 25. I'm not looking at the schedule. I'm not looking at the schedule at all. At least once I make predictions, then of course I'm going to look at the schedule, because the schedule has a lot of bearing on what the final record's going to be. A team might be the fifth best team in the country, but if they play a brutal schedule, they might finish 13th in the country, and vice versa. There might be a team that's only the 20th best team in the country, but if they play an easy schedule, they might finish in the top 10. So again, consider this, that I did not take schedule into consideration. These are who I believe to be the 10 best teams in the country going into this season. And again, I selected this sometime, let's say in February. I've got USC at 10. I gotta have to go through the video here. I've got USC at 10. I've got North Carolina at 9. No, I'm sorry. I've got Notre Dame at 9, North Carolina at 8, Iowa State 7, Texas A&M 6, Ohio State at 5, Oklahoma 4, Clemson 3, Alabama 2, Georgia number 1.
I think the big difference is you look at Texas A&M, and I think Joel mentioned Iowa State. But what's your reasoning for putting Georgia 1? I mean, with that first game against Clemson, if they win it, okay, with Mr. Young at quarterback, I can see that. But man, they got a tough schedule. I mean, going to Florida, and then in Florida, and then playing the West champion. I just don't see them resting at number 1.
Okay, here's my rationale. Now let's understand. Number 1, when you bring up this Clemson game, my rankings had nothing to do with schedules. So let's understand that. I'm not looking at schedules. I will when I make predictions. Those aren't predictions. That's me stating I believe these are the 25 best teams in college football, 1 through 25. I'm not looking at schedules. I'm just looking at talent on the roster. I'm looking at how good I think that they were last year, and especially considering what we went through in 2020, how valid that is, because for some teams, Arizona State going 2-2 last year and Washington going 3-1, we can only take so much from that. So the 2020 season is legitimate, but it's less valid than other college football seasons for a number of reasons, and it all goes back to the pandemic. So I take the 2020 season, I look at that particular team, I see the personnel losses, I see the personnel gains through recruiting, and how much of an impact I think that will be, because as we know with recruiting, the class that you just signed is only going to have so much impact, because most of that is going to come down the road. And whether I believe that team overachieved or underachieved last year. LSU underachieved, for example. And then I projected toward 2020, and I believe that Georgia was in a position to lose a ton of NFL talent, and they had most of those guys that were on the borderline, on the fence, choose to come back to school. Now, since then, they've had a number of injuries in the secondary, and they've lost their best wide receiver. So that was before, or that all happened after I ranked Georgia as the best team in the country. So how that's going to impact what I predict, we'll see.
Yeah, but you had to be, a real gambler to put Georgia at 1. They have not won a championship since 1980. Okay, that's an intangible, but it's a fact. Okay, Secondly, when's the last time Georgia's won a big game?
What do you call a
Okay,
big
so
game? Define a big
against
game and
Alabama.
define a big game, and then I will
Okay,
tell
the
you the
champ-
last time that's a big game. Just playing Alabama is a big
how
game.
about the championship game? How about the championship game against Alabama? Was that a big game?
Sure.
How about the last 2 or 3 SEC championships against Alabama? Was it those big games?
Well, they only played under Kirby Smart, Alabama, in one SEC championship game.
Was that a big game?
Let me ask you this. Absolutely, that's a big game. That's why I'm asking you to define big game, because a lot of people, they're all over the place with what they consider a big game. Let me ask you this, Dave.
One that will win you a national championship.
Let me ask you this, Dave.
When everything's on the line, and you lose. You know, they used to have a term for Clemson, so Clemsoning. So where has Georgia won a big game?
You're giving me, the more you talk, Dave, the more you talk, the more argument you're giving me, because you're telling me that at one point there was a thing called Clemsoning. Okay. If we believe that, then what happened? They got past that and they won national championships. Okay. We also need to understand, you tell me who has, and I'm not here to be some Georgia advocate and defend Georgia. I don't like being in this place, but I'm just telling you what I believe. Okay. I believe that Georgia has arguably the best roster. I'm not saying definitively has the best roster in the country. I'm saying that it's an argument between Alabama and Georgia and possibly Ohio State on who has the best roster in the country. And so let me just ask you, before you continue, let me ask you one other question. Who has played Alabama better than Georgia?
Clemson.
The last time they played.
You know that, Mark. Clemson has beaten Alabama.
Sure.
Recently.
You're starting to, they did in 2018. Sure.
When's the last time Georgia beat Alabama?
Okay. The point I'm making, Dave, is that
you asked me who has played Alabama better than Georgia. I gave you an answer. It's Clemson, correct?
Okay. If we go back to what seems to be, hang on just a second, Dave.
To see that point, you can see that point. Clemson has played Alabama better than Georgia.
Let me explain something, Dave. Hang on just a second, okay?
Okay.
You seem to, in your argument, be going back to 2017. And it's a fair year to go back to, because Kirby Smart took over in 2016. It took him a year to get the thing going. And then in 2017, they kicked it in. And that's at the point that they were what they are now. And since that time, Alabama and Clemson have played twice, and Clemson destroyed Alabama, at least through the second half of that game, and won decidedly by 4 touchdowns. And the year before, Alabama beat them by 3 scores, by 18 points. I would say that Georgia has been the team that Alabama's faced that has been able to stand toe-to-toe with them every time and play them well, meaning that in 2017, if you watched the national championship game, I'm not taking credit away from Alabama. They came back and won the national championship. There was a lot of questionable, you can find videos on YouTube of a lot of questionable calls in Alabama's favor in that game. Offsides.
Yeah, Mark. Mark, can you let me interject one point?
Yes.
Didn't Alabama's kicker doink one or miss one at the end of regulation? Okay, Alabama could have won that game, walked off the field, and Tua never has the second and 26 touchdown.
That's part of the game, though. That's part of the game. How
Okay,
good you
yeah,
can
it
kick the
is.
ball.
But the part of the game that Alabama won the trophy.
Yes, they won the trophy.
Okay,
I'm
go
not
ahead.
taking that away from Alabama. I am stating that if you evaluate
And
football,
you shouldn't.
okay,
You shouldn't.
there's a different. All that matters in the end is that there's a winner and a loser. But we're evaluating how good teams are, right? And there's a difference between Georgia losing by, I can't even get my fingers close enough together to make my point, losing that close to Alabama. There's a difference between the evaluation of those two teams versus watching LSU put up 63 points and 49 in the first half against Oklahoma and saying these two teams don't even belong on the same field. There's a complete difference in evaluating those two games, right?
Mark,
is that correct?
You asked me the question, who has played Alabama better? You have to give it to Clemson because Clemson beat Alabama. Okay?
And they also got
Georgia hasn't beat Alabama. I searched the internet, but it's been years since Georgia has beat Alabama. Okay, but that's past. But you asked me who has played, not play, can play, played Alabama better. It's Clemson. Clemson beat. I could make the argument for Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Alabama, 2 or 3 times too. But Georgia has.
All right. We're not talking about history. We're not talking about history. Those Ole Miss games against Alabama are irrelevant to the conversation that we're having now. The conversation we're having now is about where the programs stand right now.
Right, but the first game they play North Carolina. They play Georgia and Clemson. Okay, that's going to be the big game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to tell a lot. And if Georgia loses that game, where do they go from there? They probably lose to Florida down the line.
Wow, you're making you're coming to a lot of conclusions. You've already have Georgia losing to Clemson, which certainly could happen. Then you have them losing to Florida.
Mark, I said, Mark, listen to me, Mark. I said, if they lose to Clemson, okay, if they lose to Clemson, then they have to play Florida. Then they down the line, they can win the rest of the games and beat Florida. Still got that one loss. Then they play an SEC championship game against Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, Auburn, maybe. Either of those teams can beat Georgia. But I don't know how they end up at number 1.
Okay, who's your number 1 team, Dave?
Now, if you take Clemson out of the equation, maybe. They get by that game, maybe. Okay, but that's a hard one to rank. But you agree with Clapp, so maybe that's where I am.
I had no idea I don't agree with anyone. I just make my rankings. I don't look at anybody else's rankings because I don't want to be influenced. So I had no idea what he selected. Let me ask you this, Dave. Who is your number 1 team?
I'm torn between Oklahoma and Alabama.
Oklahoma.
I follow Alabama. I mean, I graduated from Alabama. I'm a Triple Five fan. But sometimes in my bias, I kind of throw out the windows, and I know there's maybe a better team out there. Maybe Oklahoma. Oklahoma is, everybody's talking about that.
Dave, let me get this straight. You are going to put yourself in the position to have to defend Oklahoma being the number 1 team in the country. And you're giving me Georgia? Really? Over the way that those two teams have performed against elite competition? Really?
Are you discounting Spencer Rattler? Are you discounting Rattler leading Oklahoma? I don't know.
I'm not saying that Oklahoma won't win the national championship this year, but you just went on for the last 15 minutes telling me that I have no business ranking Georgia number 1, and you're considering ranking Oklahoma number 1?
Right. Oklahoma doesn't play Clemson.
You're talking about a team that has not shown. Oh, what?
Mark,
Dave, you're not. Let me state one other thing. Then you can say whatever you want. Let me just remind you of one other thing, Dave. Let me remind you of one other thing. Every time you've attacked my rankings, I have reminded you I did not take the schedule into consideration. I was simply ranking the teams based on the talent on the roster. I was not taking the schedule into consideration. So whether Oklahoma plays Clemson or not, or Georgia plays Clemson, I'm not ranking them based on that. I will do that later when I make predictions.
I mean, when you do, that's where we're misconnecting. When I do an analysis, I look at the team, I look who they bring back, I look who the recruits are, and I look who they play. If you don't look who they play, how can you make a good rank?
I'm not making a prediction. My ranking is not a prediction. I will make predictions later. I'm not making predictions in February for games in November. I'm not doing that. I am giving you a ranking.
Got it.
Okay?
Got it.
It's not a prediction.
So I think an ingredient you have to consider is the schedule.
No, I am not ranking teams based on a schedule.
Why?
It's not a prediction. And other people do it different ways. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm saying that some people make a ranking based on, here's my top 25 teams in the country. Well, I got to look at the schedule. I don't do it like that. When I make my predictions, I'll look at the schedule because the schedule has a huge impact on games, obviously. And that's when I'll do it.
That's all I'm saying. Mark, that's all I'm saying. And I didn't realize your formula. And that's my apology. I didn't realize your formula.
Okay,
you
Dave.
Just said schedules are in big impact.
You don't need to apologize. I only said that about 10 times, though, that I don't take the schedule into consideration.